Some stars are born great, others have greatness thrust upon them. All depend on the whim of the public.
Men for women have sex appeal, and women for men have sex appeal. So you're based on the value of your sex appeal. Women looking at you on the screen as a man and say, ooh, I'd like to have him. If I could get rid of that old pig I'm married to, I'd grab that boy. And they have their own secret little thoughts, you know, as they look, just as men do, as they look at the girls. And that's the answer. The answer is, how much appeal have you got to the person that buys the ticket? If the public likes you, name your price.
You know, it's funny, after all these years, when I say a movie star, I still think of Gloria Swanson.
No actress in Hollywood understood what was required of her more than Gloria Swanson. She sacrificed everything for that one role, a great film star. She was one of the world's leading box office attractions. Swanson had glamour, but throughout her career, she fought to prove her talent as an actress. But the aura of glamour remained.
She was absolutely the most glamorous creature, and yet if you took her apart, she wasn't glamorous at all.
I had a fit being so short. I was supposed to be a femme fatale, and here I was 5'1" or something, and I was always way up on high heels. Why I didn't break my neck, I don't know, or my ankle, but I'm a very strong person. I don't know whether you know that or not, in many ways. Look at my chin.
She gave off this great and wonderful, glamorous illusion. So she was giving a party, and it was a large party, and no one had showed. I mean, everyone was there except the hostess. And finally, down this great staircase marched Gloria, and there wasn't a sound in the room. And she had on, I remember so well, sort of a Spanish dress with all little ruffles. And she just paused a moment and walked down, and suddenly there wasn't another woman in the room. She was marvelous. I adored her.
The daughter of an army officer, Gloria Swanson began her career in the comedy studios in 1915.
This is an army brat who had grown up as an extra out on the Senate lot. First time I ever saw La Belle Swanson, Wallace Beery was chasing her all over the set. He caught her, too.
I loathed comedy. I had no sense of humor. I was a very serious young lady, and 14, 15, 16 years old. I didn't always understand the jokes. I really didn't. I think I was funny because I played them like Dusa. I was so serious in all the comedy that it was funny, and the situations were funny. But they were not slapstick pictures that I did.
Swanson starred with Bobby Vernon in a series of comedies for Mack Sennett. Sennett was convinced she had some of the qualities of his top star, Mabel Normand.
He told me he was going to make a second Mabel Normand out of me, and I said, I'm very sorry, Mr. Sennett, I don't want to be a second anybody. And then when he had me in the first picture without Bobby Vernon, which was a real slapstick picture, it was called The Pullman Bride, and there was Max Swain and Chester Conklin, and I never worked with people like this. And they started throwing soup and pies around. I didn't like it at all. I didn't think it was funny, and I didn't want to do it. When they said they wanted me to do a pratfall, I didn't even know what this was, and it was some sort of a thing where you keep your feet together and you go over backwards. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you could kill yourself. And so they sent for Mr. Sennett, and there was a great big scene about it. And finally, I told him I didn't want to be in these kind of pictures. And he said, nobody has to work with me. Come on, young lady. And he took me into his office and tore up the contract, I was so happy, you have no idea.
The failed comedienne was transformed by Cecil B. DeMille into the most glamorous star of the age.
DeMille always did everything in the grand fashion. There was no other director like him in the world. He was a fascinating man, brilliant man. You felt his presence before he came in a room.
An important scene in Male and Female was to show Swanson descending into a lion pit with real lions. But even DeMille felt the risk was too great for his new star. At the last minute, he decided to cancel the scene.
I said, Mr. DeMille, you can't do this to me. I want to do that scene, the Lion's Bride scene. He said, young fellow, why do you want to do that? Why are you so bent on doing that particular scene? I said, you don't understand. When I was a little girl in my grandmother's house, she has a painting, a replica of this famous painting called The Lion's Bride. And here it was with the bride with the lion on her back. She had gone to say goodbye to this cub she'd raised. And the lion killed her, the grown one. Oh, he said, well, all right, come on. So down into this thing we go, and Mr. DeMille with a gun, revolver in his hand, no one else but the two trainers. And they bring out this fuzzy lion, and they claim he's a nice lion. Only 2 weeks after we had done this scene did he almost kill someone. At any rate, we didn't know that then. Mr. DeMille, of course, is back for the camera, and I look up, and here's my father in uniform. He'd come back from the war, looking at his one and only, with his eyes popping out of his head. What's going to happen if something happens? And looking at DeMille with his gun, and at that, they said, ready camera. Now, to make the lion roar, the two trainers are lashing him with their whips, and he's roaring. Now, let me tell you the sensation. When you can't look at danger and your eyes are closed, and here he is with his paws, weight on the back of my bare back, because I'm bare to the waist. His hot breath, if I had any fuzz on my body at all, it was all standing right smack up. My heart, I don't know what it was doing. Then when he roared, it was like thousands of vibrators all over you. It was the most awesome, dangerous, fascinating. I suppose danger is always this way. I don't know. But it was something I shall never forget. And then to go to the opening of the picture and have somebody sitting behind me and say, I wonder which one is stuffed.
Gloria Swanson's name was now of enormous interest to the public.
Gloria got a salary from C.B. DeMille for the first time, and she was so excited she didn't know what to do, and she said, the thing in my life I've always wanted the most, I want a beautiful, elegant automobile painted orchid color. And I said, oh, Gloria, you can't have an automobile. Yes, I can, and what's more, I'm going to. And right then, Miss Gloria Swanson set the fact that what she did was not to do what other people did, but she was to do something that made other people do what Gloria Swanson did. She set fashions and hair color, and she had an orchid-colored automobile. She could ride around.
After she left DeMille, critics of her new pictures suggested her fame owed more to her gowns than her acting.
Every picture I made was just the train got longer and the hairdo got more complicated, until I got so fed up I started screaming, I don't want to be a clothes horse. Let me out of this thing. I want to be an actress. I want to do character parts. I want to do fun things. So then I lied to them to get to New York, because I knew there was a script there called Zaza. And so I said I had to have an operation, and indeed I did have to have one. And well, they couldn't say anything about that. And I got off the train, went right to a man called, oh, he was the head of story department, Walter Wanger, and said, give me Zaza. He said, I thought you were going to the hospital. I said, after Zaza.
This fiery role was just what she needed to confound her critics.
Alan Dwan said, Gloria, you know, you don't have a duplicate of the gown you have on. Neither has the girl that you're going to fight with. And the furniture and the, you know, and the props and everything, we can only do it once, so make it good the first time. So I went after this girl until she was so frightened of me, this actress, that she tried to stay away from me, so that when I did get a hold of her, I was mopping up the place with her.
Alan Dwan again directed Swanson in Manhandled, in which she departed from her glamorous image still further by playing a shop girl. She actually worked in Gimbel's department store for a couple of days to get atmosphere. But Dwan felt she had still more to learn, for the film had a sequence set in the subway.
Gloria had never been on a subway. She was above that. She had a limousine. And so she had to know what a subway was, otherwise she couldn't portray it.
I have claustrophobia, and I wouldn't go on a subway, and they said, well, they would come with me, and I had my first ride, then I didn't like it at all.
Gloria and I got on it, but she didn't notice that I immediately stepped off quickly through a door, and she was inside, and the door slammed, and she was jammed in the aisles. And she had to go across to Times Square without knowing where she was going, or how you get on, or how you get off. She rode that thing between Grand Central and Times Square about 4 or 5 times before somebody just physically at Times Square shoved her off. She found herself out on the platform. She had learned by that what it meant for a girl that didn't look like very much to get caught in a mob in the subway, and to finally find herself penniless and alone up in Times Square, so that we didn't have to tell her very much more about the character. She had learned it the hard way.
In the same film, Swanson's shopgirl poses as a phony Russian countess. She based the character on her rival at Paramount, Pola Negri. Swanson's wedding in France to the Marquis Henri de la Falaise de la Coudray was the society event of the year and started a new fashion.
When she came home after she married Henri de la Falaise, she said, "You will now call me Madame Marquis." And we did, too.
There were flowers, flowers, until I couldn't sit. I wasn't sitting on the car. I was sitting on top of the flowers, and they were throwing these at me, and there were two bands, not one. This was United Artists, and they were flirting with me to come to United Artists. And the Paramount were flirting with me to keep me at Paramount. So everybody from both ranks were there.
In France, Swanson had been ill and had almost died. At Grauman's $1 Million Theatre, the public gave her the sort of welcome which one paper said had been given in the past only to a beloved sovereign.
I get to the top of the aisle, the lights go on, the audience rise, turn around, sing Home Sweet Home to me. Now this sounds corny to say it now, but in 1925, with everybody ever in the motion picture business, somebody on crutches, I think it was Ernest Torrance, somebody else in a wheelchair, somebody you worked with, somebody, I just stood there and I cried.
While the film was in progress, the police found the crowd outside too hard to handle. They asked Miss Swanson's party to leave by the rear exit.
So we crawled out, got into the car, and it would have taken about, in those days, almost an hour to get to Beverly Hills. And in this ride, I sat in the center with my mother on one side, Henry on the other, and one of the other of them said to me, "Why are you so silent, Gloria? This should have been the greatest moment of your life." And I said, "Oh, you darlings don't understand." Yes, but all that adulation, everything you've seen tonight, was not for my work as an artist. This was a personality who came back like Lazarus from the dead, Cinderella who married the prince, and the prodigal who's returned, because I hadn't been in California in 4 years. I said, that's what you saw tonight. That's why the ovation. That's why the excitement. If I were to make the greatest picture tomorrow of my whole career, you would never have that happen again. Never. It was a combination of emotions and things. And so I said, now I have a problem. I have to go down the other side.
Swanson relived the occasion in a dream sequence in Stage Struck, but it would be one of her last films for Paramount. She told the heads of the company she was leaving to join United Artists. In panic, Zukor and Lasky asked Alan Dwan, as director and friend, to intercede.
I went to her and said, "Gloria, I'm going to make you one offer to stay with the company. I'm going to offer you $25,500 a week to stay with us for 1 year. I will raise you $5,000 a week for the next 5 years beyond that, if you'll sign." I said, "You add that up and see how much money that means." And she looked at me and laughed. She said, "Why, darling, I'm going to make $1 million on every picture I do with the United Artists."
Swanson staked her career on this gamble. Her first production, The Loves of Sonia, was a financial failure. Had she really been able to see into the crystal ball, she would have known the talking picture revolution lay just 7 months ahead. But she embarked on 2 more silent films. The first, Sadie Thompson, based on Somerset Maugham's Rain, would be a smash hit. The second, a disaster. She hired Erich von Stroheim to direct her in Queen Kelly. Stroheim drained the resources of financier Joseph Kennedy until Swanson was forced to cancel the production. The film was never seen in the United States. "20 years later, this scene appeared in Sunset Boulevard, in which Gloria Swanson played an aging silent movie star.
Still wonderful, isn't it? And no dialogue. We didn't need dialogue. We had faces. There just aren't any faces like that anymore. Those idiot producers. Those imbeciles. Haven't they got any eyes? Have they forgotten what a star looks like? I'll show them. I'll be up there again, so help me.
Ironically, this was the role for which Gloria Swanson would be best remembered. The crowd that lined the streets of New York in August 1926 had all the gaiety and expectation of people going to the movies. The newsreel cameras brought smiles of delight. The crowds were there for Rudolph Valentino, the great lover. For women in the 1920s, he personified the menace of forbidden love. But the crowds that August waited in the rain to see their idol in the flesh. For some, it would be the first time, for all, the last. Rudolph Valentino was dead. His body was lying in state in Campbell's funeral parlor. Valentino's effect on women astonished even the men who produced his pictures. A typical publicity stunt measured women's pulse rates as they watched a Valentino film. It was all due, they said, to his earthy origins as an illiterate peasant in Italy. But like everyone else, they misunderstood Valentino. He'd come from Italy as a young man, but he was neither illiterate nor a peasant.
We were not a rich family, neither an aristocrat one. We were in the middle class, but in quite comfortable position. My father was a veterinarian, a health officer, and a biologist. The majority of a story not truthful, that he came here because he was a poor boy, an immigrant, to make money, to try to find fortune. No. In his life, he was always guided and pushed by spirit of adventure. He used to say, Italy is too small for me.
When he arrived in New York at the age of 18, Valentino was hard up. Like so many immigrants, he had a photograph taken in rented clothes to reassure his family back home.
And in order not to worry my mother, when he wrote, he went to the Waldorf Astoria and wrote letter from there, but he didn't sleep there. He was not a guest of the Waldorf Astoria. On the contrary, he told me that sometime he even slept in the Central Park.
Eventually, Valentino got a job at a New York cafe, dancing with the customers.
He never took in his life any dancing lesson. But he had a natural grace in dancing.
When he went to Hollywood, his Italian looks condemned him to play the gigolo in an endless parade of screen villains. In 1919, director Al Parker gave him an important role in Eyes of Youth. His career was improving. His private life was miserable. His wife, actress Jean Acker, had left him, and that Christmas he was depressed and lonely.
I said, "What are you doing for Christmas?" He said, "Well, nothing." I said, "Haven't you any place to go?" He said, "Well, no, I don't." I said, "Well, you sure do." I said, "You're going to come home with me. This is our big night. My mother and father will be there and the presents, and you're going to be right with us." He said, "Oh, that'll be marvelous." So we made him Santa Claus. I had a red cape, and then we put a red hat on him, and we got cotton and put a white beard on him, and he handed out the presents. A lot of people have, it's made me laugh. A lot of people, said, oh, how well they knew Rudy and what they did for him and all that sort of thing. And I think, well, there was one Christmas they forgot about Rudy before he was anything. After he did the Four Horsemen, that was different.
Valentino now entered film history. He was cast as Julio, an Argentinian playboy. Director Rex Ingram exploited his skill as a dancer and his frank sensuality. At this period, the tango was regarded as an indecent dance. Ingram used it as a symbol of open eroticism. The Four Horsemen was scripted by June Mathis. She had spotted Valentino in Eyes of Youth. She became a close friend for the rest of his career. The film established Valentino as a new kind of screen lover. But this success did not bring him instant stardom. He played straightforward roles in other Metro films. Camille with the Russian actress Nazimova. The most impressive thing about Camille was its sets. And Valentino was surprised to learn that their designer was a young dancer, Natasha Rambova. Her real name was Winifred Hudnut. She was heiress to the Hudnut cosmetic fortune. Valentino fell in love with her, and the romance perfectly suited her ambitions. She was determined to become a major producer. Valentino joined famous players Lasky and was featured opposite Agnes Ayres in The Sheik. These shots were taken during the production. In the title role, Valentino was a sensation. He played an Arab sheik who abducts an English girl to his desert tent. Natasha considered the story utter trash. Valentino was not happy about it either, but he mesmerized most women who saw it. His acting may look strange today, but some people thought that he conveyed ideas with his eyes which they daren't put into words. The very quality which appealed to women upset their husbands. Valentino inspired envy and ridicule from American men.
They were not very understanding about Valentino. He came along as the first of the great foreign lovers. See, that was one of the interesting things about Gable. Every American man was perfectly willing that his wife should be in love with Gable, because Gable was what he liked to have been. But they were not willing that their wife should be in love with this Dago.
The Sheik made Valentino a top star. Natasha agreed to marry him. But Valentino's marriage ended in jail. The laws of California required a full year between divorce and remarriage. A bigamy charge was dismissed, but Natasha raised the question, why had famous players Lasky allowed its biggest star to go to jail? Valentino's next picture, Blood and Sand, would be made in Spain with no expense spared, promised the company. But they shot it cheaply on the back lot. It was a success, but Valentino and Natasha felt cheated. They were depressed still more by the young Raja.
He had the right, though, of an approval of a story, which they recognize in the contract. But actually, practically, they didn't do it. And that started a fight.
Valentino walked out on his contract, refusing to appear in any more cheap pictures. But the fans kept writing in for photographs.
We had a printing box, the negative, and we used to print 100 a night, and dry them on the floor, and towels, and God knows what. And his signature was on, it was a stamp. So. And we would send a postcard saying, if you want a photograph of Rudy Valentino, please send 25 cents for the cost or whatever. And as we were getting between 8 and 9 sacks of mail a day from the fans, Natasha and I and Rudy, we used to open up the letters and count the quarters. And in between pictures, it fed us, you know.
Valentino and Natasha were out of work and broke, but they felt they were fighting for their artistic integrity. A public relations man, George Ullman, found there was nothing in his contract to stop Valentino making a personal appearance tour. He arranged for the couple to promote a beauty preparation. Valentino and Natasha gave dancing displays, and wherever they appeared, vast crowds greeted them. The climax of their act was the tango from the Four Horsemen.
He was so absolutely hounded by publicity,
crowds would gather. I've heard tales of women picking up cigar butts in the streets and cherishing them. It was just insanity.
As part of the mineral lava deal, Valentino had to judge local beauty contests. A promoter called David Selznick exploited Valentino's absence from the screen with a film of his appearance at Madison Square Garden in New York. He released it at great profit, for fresh footage of Valentino was gold dust. This enormous popularity obliged Adolf Zukor of famous players Lasky to conclude a settlement. Mounting debts obliged Valentino to agree. He and Natasha took a European holiday. These shots are from the home movies they made en route. Valentino was already Italy's most famous emigrant, yet he was not as well known in Italy as he was in the rest of Europe.
And he had just come back from Rome, which he had visited for the first time since becoming a big star. And Bibi said, "Tell me, Rudy, what did they think of you when you arrived in Italy?" And he thought for a moment, he said, "Bibi, in Italy, I was just another wop."
The influence of Natasha affected Valentino's new film, Monsieur Beaucaire. The critics were quick to notice it. The film was too arty, they said, too self-conscious for Valentino fans. They expected that quality of menace, and they didn't get it. Valentino's co-star was Lois Wilson.
He was a very serious worker. Rudolph didn't kid on the set and that sort of thing. He was a very generous actor to work with, charming. And I had known him before. I knew him quite well before we made the picture as a person. And I just found him a very charming, lovely person with a terrific sense of humor.
Valentino displayed humor and elegance in Beaucaire, but the fans expected passion.
We found a delicatessen or a store on the plaza here that sold very, very long spaghetti in a cardboard box. It was about 6 or 7 feet long. And we used to buy those boxes and never break the spaghetti. So before Woody prepared them and he had boiling water, he would stand on the ladder and slowly move those spaghettis into the pot.
Valentino entertained important executives.
When they would start trying to cut it with a knife, says, "Oh no, in Italy you never cut that, you wind it on your fork." Well, how are you going to wind 6 feet? 6 feet of spaghetti, you raise your head and wind, and when you're done, you wind again and everything falls down. And we had a lot of fun doing that.
But Valentino had no sense of humor about his wife. He submitted to photographs like these because he loved and admired her. Over him, she exerted an almost hypnotic influence. But now, her interest was fading. So was his career. In the hope of putting new life into the romance, he bought a house, Falcon Lair. He gave Natasha a free hand with the interior design. But Natasha never spent a night in the place. To conceal the broken marriage, they went in front of the newsreel cameras and played a farewell scene. Natasha was going east to make a film on her own. They would never live together again. Valentino signed with United Artists to make The Eagle with Vilma Banky for producer Joseph Schenck. Directed by Clarence Brown, it proved far more successful than the films Natasha had supervised. Valentino played a Russian bandit married in the death cell before being led out to die. Valentino began a romance with Pola Negri. He spent money recklessly. His friends asked why. "I have a hunch," he said, "that it won't make a damn bit of difference." He drove recklessly. He had several near-fatal crashes. Natasha sued for divorce. He became more and more depressed. To ease his money problems, he determined to make a surefire hit, a sequel to The Sheik, and was delighted to have an old friend, George Fitzmaurice, as director. Fitzmaurice had a sophisticated understanding of Valentino's appeal. Valentino's influence on men's fashions encouraged the wearing of wristwatches and slave bracelets. And when a powder machine appeared in a men's washroom, the Chicago Tribune blamed it on Valentino. Why didn't someone quietly drown Rudolph Guglielmo, alias Valentino, years ago?
Well, it was very unjust. Valentino was an extremely manly man and could probably have taken most of them if it came to having a good fight, you know. He was a fine swordsman, good fencer, and there was nothing of the powder puff about him. This one particular thing really made Valentino go quite stark mad. He resented it just terribly, and he said to me, "This isn't fair. It is not fair. I mean, I have none of those attributes. I'm a man, I've always shown it. I have been madly in love with only one woman, but I've always been in love with her. And to make belittling pink powder puff remarks is a very unjust thing. And if the guy will come out here, I will tangle with him face to face."
The man never appeared. Valentino staged an exhibition bout under the eye of Jack Dempsey. The pressures on him were enormous. Fighting his divorce, facing bankruptcy, coping with a gastric ulcer, and now fending off attacks in the press. A few days later, he fell ill and was rushed to hospital.
They didn't want to take any responsibility of making an operation of Rudolph Valentino. So they were waiting for some big surgeon, well-known surgeon, experienced surgeon, to come along. But being on Sunday, they couldn't find anybody until 6 o'clock.
Precious hours were wasted while the fever mounted. When the surgeon was found, he discovered a perforated ulcer.
The first 2 or 3 days after operation was getting better. All of a sudden, he had to turn for the worse because the peritonitis developed and was the one who killed him.
Valentino lay in state at Campbell's funeral parlor.
A great many of them really had had a lot of feeling and affection for Valentino. So it was a crowd filled with emotion and with hysterical emotion that you weren't at all sure what they might do. Hysterical crowds behave badly at funerals.
7 days later, the funeral. Ben Lyon took charge.
I received word one day at the Ambassador Hotel in New York from the florist in the lobby that they had a phone order from Miss Pola Negri to place a blanket of white roses across the top of the casket 6 feet before, and in the center, in 1-foot letters in red roses, P-O-L-A, Pola. Well, let's make it look like an opening night for her, a premiere or something. I said, under no circumstances will those flowers be placed on that casket. And they weren't, and of course she was furious and put up a terrific fight, and I said, they're not going on. And the whole thing turned out to be, if you remember, that she fainted and fell down and had to be carried. It was a premiere for Pola Negri.
Among the pallbearers were Adolf Zukor, Marcus Lowe, Rex Ingram, Douglas Fairbanks, and Joseph Schenck. Natasha Rambova did not appear. There was to be a second funeral in Hollywood. Alberto Valentino joined the train for the 5-day journey.
We went across country and it was amazing. You can't believe me, but it's true that to see the people that they came and the way in which they were trying to show their shock and their affection for. I was awake early in the morning because it was just dawn and the train stopped. And I was informed that was a group of people from Erie which had come with guitar, mandolin. The great majority were Italian, living here in this country. And they just asked me permission if they could sing and play some of the Italian song for the memory of Rudolph. It was very touching.
It was the biggest funeral Hollywood had ever seen. At the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, stars like Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks paid their last respects.
Schenck collected 2 $1 million insurances on his life. They didn't even buy him a grave. He's resting in a box that belonged to June Mattis. See, she had free, whatever they call those drawers where they put them in the wall, for herself, for her mother, and she had bought one for her husband at the time, Balboni. And so when Rudy died, she says, if you have no grave for Rudy, you can use the spot of Balboni's, and he's still there.
Valentino was 31 years old. His death gave him a status he had never sought in his life. He had become immortal.